Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem 306, The Soul's Superior Instance. This is a fascinating poem. We are back to poem 303, The Soul Selects Her Own Society. Again, many have called this an example of Emily as metaphysical poet, kind of in the tradition of John Donne. And the obvious question is, in what ways does the soul select its own society? And this is the argument that will be made in this poem, and I think this will be a fascinating study, I hope, for us. Now, our assumptions that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our preceding 305 poems. We just finished with 305, The Difference Between Despair. Now, in many ways, we are in this poem back to the question that we've seen so many times already, the question of the poetic muse. In other words, why is it that God, or inspiration, or the muse, or whatever, allows a small few to be able to be inspired, to use the language of the Greeks? This is in many ways another poem about immortality and the capacity to outlive the life that one lives. And notice the rhythm of this poem. It is a fascinating poem to read out loud. It requires a certain kind of slowing as you read this out loud, which I find to me a kind of remarkable attempt here. We are in many ways playing pattern recognition games. And to me, this is an example of Emily's genius. Let's enjoy the way in which she will play the game out. Although, let's remind ourselves what she said to Higginson, quote, she said, "Don't take the I of my poems to always be myself," end quote. And I think that's significant here. But it's clear that Emily is asking a powerful question about poetics. The soul's superior instance occur to her alone, when friend and earth's occasions have infinite withdrawn, or she, herself, ascended to too remote a height for lower recognition than her omnipotent. This mortal abolition is seldom, but as fair as apparition, subject to autocratic air, eternity's disclosure to favorites a few, of the colossal substance of immortality. Now, we begin with recognition of all these S sounds, from soul, superior to substance, and then all of the A sounds as well as we play the game. Of course, this is a poem about the importance of solitude. Again, back to poem 303, The Soul Selects Her Own Society, and then What Shuts the Door, you'll recall. The soul's superior instance, notice we go from superior to colossal, occur to her alone. We're back to the soul being represented in the feminine. And then the key word here, I think, is the word alone, as it relates to few later in the poem. The soul's superior instance occur to her alone when friend and earth's occasion have infinite withdrawn. Now, this is, of course, one of those really old questions that takes us back to our study of Shelley's Defense of Poetry, that the poet, the artist, the singer is often in solitude when he or she gains the insights that will be the most important poetic insights. And so it's when friend, it's when everything that has to do with the normal, the earth's occasion, have infinite withdrawn and everything goes away. Or, the other option, she, notice all these dashes that break this rhythm up, herself ascended, again, notice all the A words in this poem, to too remote a height for lower recognition. Now, I think the key motif here is this idea of ascendant. We are back to Plato and, of course, Plotinus. The idea of Republic 7, you'll remember, where coming out of the cave of darkness into the light of the sun, one must ascend, one must go up somehow. You'll remember that the opening lines of Republic, I went down to the Piraeus, and we make comments at LearnStrong.net in our full lectures of Republic, that's the important first notion, is directionality matters. And of course, the notion of ascending is central. Now, She will use this idea of ascension in several of her poems. We've seen it already in 93 and 167. When we get to poem 564, she'll play it this way. I'm just mentioning a few of these poems because we're going to come back to them. At 564, she'll say it this way. She says, my period had come for prayer, no other art would do. My tactics missed a rudiment, creator, was it you? God grows above, so those who pray, horizons must ascend. And so I stepped up on the north to see this curious friend. We'll see it again, this idea of ascension in poem 700. In poem 1421, she'll play with it the idea this way. Such are the inlets of the mind, his outlets would you see. Ascend with me the eminence of immortality. Notice the last word of this poem is the last word of 306 as well. Then in poem 1450, she'll play the game again. The road was lit with moon and star, the trees were bright and still. Descried I by the distant light, a traveler on a hill, to magic perpendiculars ascending through terrain. Unknown his shimmering ultimate, but he endorsed the sheen. Again, this idea of ascension. And then finally, she'll mention it one more time in 1475, where she'll play it this way. Fame is the one that does not stay. Its occupant must die, or out of sight of estimate, ascend incessantly, or be the most insolvent thing, a lightning in the germ. And then she'll finish this poem with the final lines. If I can turn the page. Electrical the embryo, but we demand the flame. Again, this idea of lighting and ascending, obviously borrowing heavily from Dante's Divine Commedia. You'll remember that we move, as we give full lectures at learnstrong.net over the Divine Comedy, that we move from Inferno through Purgatory to finally Paradiso. And how is that best understood? Well, obviously it's the radiant light, isn't it? So notice, or she herself ascended to too remote a height for lower recognition. And again, I think that word recognition marries nicely with immortality. Then her omnipotent. This mortal abolition is seldom. In other words, it is only very seldom that these souls superior instants happen. Insight, we might call it. But it's as fair as apparition, subject to autocratic error. Autocratic used only one time in all her poetry, and it's here. And then she'll go to immortality and eternity. Eternity's disclosure, insight, right, to favorites, a few, and again, notice how the rhythm keeps getting broken, of the colossal substance. Colossal used one and only one time in all of her poetry, and it's here. Of immortality. Well, what is she saying here in the end at 2a for messages? I think her argument is that poetic and spiritual insight best happens when alone and in solitude, and only a very few are ever able to truly enjoy it. This is, of course, why we will reference that kind of behavior as genius-like, right? And in that regards, I think that it makes a whole lot of sense to say this is one of those poems that argues Emily gets it. She understands what genius and insight and perspicacity actually is. At 2b, well, obviously we pointed out all of the word choices of alone and ascended. I'm also interested in her alliterations, right? Soul, superior, remote, recognition, favorites, view. Her rhyming that's internal, right? Occur to, her, when, friend. Notice the end rhymes that are dissonant. Alone, withdrawn, height, omnipotent, few, immortality. The consonances here are also interesting. Instance, alone, when, friend, and infinite, withdrawn, favorites, colossal, substance, right? And what does all this tell you? Well, Emily is perfecting the craft here of all of the amazing sounds of the poem. Finally, at 3a, well, I think Emily was very much affected by Dante and her study of Dante and the Divine Comedy and that ascending. But I also would like to think about her study of Genesis 28, 10 through 19, and of course the famous Jacob's ladder, that stairway to heaven and all of that, the angels ascending and descending in Jacob's dream. I think that's also a part of it. And of course we've seen this already referenced in a number of her poems up to this point. Finally, in 3b, to own a poem like this, when was a time that you enjoyed this spiritual insight that she is referencing? And if you were able to discover the muse, were you alone when it happened? I hope Emily's challenging you. Thank you.